Welcome to Conversations, Lehman College's series of discussions with major theater artists of our time. For the second of a two-part chat, our guest today is the playwright, screenwriter, novelist, director, producer of Broadway and Hollywood, Arthur Laurents. Welcome again to Conversations.
Thank you.
Where we left off was method acting, Actors Studio, how do you think they gained such renown?
Part of the reason was Elia Kazan, Gad, she was known as, who I have no respect for as a man because he was an informer. But he
during the McCarthy era, for those.
Yes, he informed, and when he didn't have to, he informed because he wanted to direct films. He was God in the theater, and he could have made all the money he wanted. Anyway, he changed acting in the American theater. He had worked with the group theater, where they did a cockamamie version of the method. Stella Adler, who was a member of the group, went to Paris to meet Stanislavski and worked with him, and she came back and she said, "We're all wrong." But it was too late. The damage had been done. But Gage began directing in the theater, and basically the method is about using yourself. They had no technique. By that I mean they couldn't play period pieces, they couldn't play high comedy, they couldn't play Noel Coward. They could play a certain kind of angst drama, and extremely well. But in his first play, there was a man, an actor named Osgood Perkins, whose son was Anthony Perkins, who did Psycho. And Perkins was all the English school, which is really technical and wonderful technique. And Kazan was smart enough to realize you had to combine both. And he did that, and he made his actors burn up the stage. You never saw such acting.
Marlon Brando.
No, that's where the falseness came in. Marlon Brando was a Stella Adler pupil. He directed him, but he had learned from Stella. He did Death of a Salesman. He did Streetcar Named Desire. He also, and the reason I hesitate, it did Cat in the Hot Tin Roof, in which he made Tennessee change the ending, so it was a total lie. But it was a hit. And that's when the switch came from doing good theater to doing hit theater. But he had started this kind of fiercely emotional acting, and it was dazzling to see. You don't see very much of it anymore. I don't know why. I guess because they have no opportunity to practice. They're, you know, in those days, and until quite recently, summer theater was great for young actors because it was all experimental and adventurous. And off-Broadway was really off-Broadway. It was off-Broadway. They did it in storefronts. There was a play called The Connection by Jack Gilbert about shooting up.
Very well.
And when you went to it, they were shooting up in the lobby. It was fake, but you believed it. It was really exciting. There was a group called the Living Theater, I think, the Molinas.
Yes.
And I went one night. This is the absurdity of it. It was the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And there was, I don't know, they had a cast of hundreds. And they were down in the audience saying, "I am not allowed to smoke marijuana." Well, we were all sitting there talking away. So this kid came over and said, "I am not allowed to smoke marijuana." I said, "Take your improvisation someplace else." So he said, "I am not allowed to smoke." I said, "You are. Take your improvisation someplace else." And finally they did. It was that kind. Also, there was a woman on stage proselytizing for the teachers' union. We thought it was part of the play. It wasn't. She was serious. But, you know, where would that be today? Nothing like that goes on. It's all this
I remember Julian Beck, I was his editor, I worked in book publishing at Hill and Wang, and he accused me of being a fascist because I asked him to put a comma between two.
Well, Judith Malina claimed she was raped on stage that night.
Right.
Impossible. Did you ever see Judith Malina?
Yes.
Impossible. Call me an anti-feminist. I'm telling you, she was off. It isn't so much what she looked. She was terrifying.
She was. She really was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did, nowadays, if you go to Actors Studio for readings there and their productions, one sees a certain kind of theater. How has this gained total ascendance as the method is now one of the only schools? It is in the popular mind.
Well, actually, there are two schools that are much better. There's a neighborhood playhouse.
Right.
Where Sandy Meisner started a system based on Stella.
On
Stella's influence. And then there's HB.
Right.
Uta Hagen School. And they're both better. The method has got its notoriety based on one name, Marlon Brando.
Right.
Yeah, I remember, I used to go there, and I remember I saw an acting class. They were all busy being trees. Well, what that had to do with acting, I didn't know. And then they had a class for professionals, and I went, and an actor named Arthur Kennedy, who had been in Death of a Salesman, criticized another actor named Ben Piazza, who may still be around. And he said, I thought Ben showed great improvement. I could understand 50% of what he said. So I spoke. Now, when they criticized each other, which I thought was terrible.
Ruthlessly.
And then Lee spoke. And when Lee spoke, Strasberg this is, they turned on a tape recorder for all posterity. So I criticized, and I said, I repeated that, and I said, the trouble with you people is you have no sense of humor. Nobody laughed. So he said, oh, a sensitive playwright comes and tells us we mumble. I said, well, you do. And I said, you cannot train somebody to run a hurdle race if they're only running on a flat floor. They have to learn how to speak. Well, he started arguing with me. And then I said, Lee, which was true at the time, it isn't now, I don't believe in God anyplace, and certainly not in this room. Well, they started. Anne Bancroft and Jane Fonda were in tears. Don't let him alone. They carried on like maniacs.
I wonder if they have that on tape.
No, only Lee. Only Lee.
Which of the... Now, you've worked with an incredible array of stars. Ethel Merman, Barbara Streisand.
Does anybody know who they are? I guess Meet the Fockers. They know who Streisand is.
Who did you most like working with? Do you have a favorite? Do you have a...
No. I love working with actors. Ethel was... Does anybody still know who Ethel Merman was?
Yeah.
Well,
our audience here does.
Yeah, she was a life force. She was not too swift. She once said to Jack Klugman, who was her leading man in Gypsy, is Tab Hunter gay? He said, is the Pope Catholic? And she said, yes. So there she was. And I wrote special stage directions in the script for her.
How so?
I wrote louder, slowing down, forcefully, quietly. So Jerry Robbins, who was directed, says, she says, it says here, louder, I'm doing it louder. That was acting to her. She didn't know. But it came intuitively to her. And when she was on, it was wonderful. And it was very revealing, as acting can be just as revealing as writing is. She had a line in Gypsy where she's dressing her daughter to go on stage and strip. And she said, get them, beg for more, and then don't give it to them. Talking about the men out front.
Right.
And when Ethel said that, she let out a maniacal cackle of glee. And you got her attitude toward men. That was how she felt. Don't give it to them.
As the librettist of that project, now, of course, the libretto comes first in that project, no?
Yes. In any project, I do.
And
It should.
Project, I do, too.
It should.
Prima le parole, first the words.
Yeah, but what they do these days, they bring you a score written by the Beach Boys and say, make up a story.
Which is an impossibility.
So you get out the surfboard and say goodbye.
Right. How much freedom did you have in that libretto?
Oh, total. Gypsy Rose Lee only wanted one thing. It had to be called Gypsy. As a matter of fact, there was a character in it named Herbie. He was the leading man, he was her agent, and he was her paramour, as they used to say. And she said, I wish I'd thought of Herbie for my autobiography. I asked her where she got the name. She said, oh, honey, I've given 14 versions. Make one up, it'll be better. So I did.
Did you know it was going to be the kind, when did you realize that it was cooking? When did you realize it was cooking?
It had what is still, for them, what is still alive, the most exciting, invited run-through, really, in the history of the American theater. It was a Sunday afternoon at the Winter Garden. We had no idea what the show was going to be like. And it was a big showbiz audience, and they screamed.
Right.
And it was, I remember sitting next to Steve Sondheim, who was taking notes, and I took the pad out of his hand and threw it on the floor. I said, enjoy yourself, it may be the last time. But from that you knew. Oh, then we went to Philadelphia, where it was a dire disaster. And Steve loves disaster. He thrives on it. He stands at the head of the aisle listening for bad comments. He comes and says, did you hear? They said it'll never get to New York. He was happy.
I have to say that may be my favorite musical. And
well, thank you. It's mine.
It's a perfect musical, actually.
Well, nothing's perfect.
Did you know it was going to come out that dark?
Oh, yes. I knew for a curious reason. When I wrote it, I knew that since Gypsy Rose Lee was going to be in it, and it was about her, they originally wanted it to be about her. I said I was not interested in the striptease queen of America. But I knew she was going to have to do a big strip. And I knew the mother, that Ethel Merman played, Rose, was going to have to top it. So I thought, how can she top it? And then I thought, by doing what she's always wanted to do, to be a bigger star than her daughter. So she had to do a strip in her head. Well, if you get a woman like that,
right,
it's going to be dark. And it was.
When you were working on West Side Story, did you guys know, did you sense that it was theatrical dynamite?
Oh, I gave it 3 months. I was sure it was a failure. Absolutely. You know, you had a rape, or an attempted rape. You had 2 deaths at the end of the first act, another death at the end of the second act, race prejudice, bigotry, you know, all the stuff of a musical. So I thought, this is not going to work. It worked for us, but not the audience. And also, as good as it is or isn't, it's because when we were writing it, we were just writing what we wanted to write.
Right.
We cared about the work. And it was a wonderful experience.
Now, it didn't start out to be about the Jets and the whatever.
Sharks. No. Well, it was Jerry Robbins' idea to adapt Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and he wanted it on the Lower East Side about Catholics and Jews. And I first said yes. I was excited at the prospect. I wanted to do a musical. I always did. I think there's nothing more theater than walking down the aisle during an overture.
Right.
And if it's your own show, you know, my God. Also, if you haven't paid for the tickets, it's better. So, and Lenny was going to, Bernstein was going to do it, so I wanted to do it. And then I realized there had been a play years before by a woman named Ann Nichols called Obie's Irish Rose. Well, that was Romeo and Juliet on the Lower East Side, so I said no. And then a lot of time passed, and then Lenny and I were in Beverly Hills. And actually there were riots, race riots, Chicano, against the so-called, whatever they called them, Aryans, but that was in Germany. And there was a great deal of what was called juvenile delinquency, and I thought that would be we could do it that way. And Lenny wanted to write Latin American
Right,
music.
of course.
He loved those rhythms.
Of course.
So I said, I know nothing about Los Angeles, but I did about New York, and why don't we do it about New York and Puerto Ricans? And there we were.
So it went from East Side Story to West Side Story.
That's how it got to be West Side Story.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, it was. Also, all the scenery, on the back of the scenery, they write the title was Gangway, because the big guru in the musical theater was George Abbott, who said West Side Story is a lousy title. So kidding, I said, well, let's call it Gangway. And they said, great. And that's what we were going to call it till finally we persuaded them not to.
Since we've been hopping around and skipping around here, I wanted to ask you, do you have any writing routine?
No. I'll tell you how extreme it can get. This new play of mine, as I said, I finished the first act, which I read to my partner, Tom Hatcher. I read every scene, and he had a suggestion. And the next morning, I was lying in bed, and I suddenly thought of a speech. And before I did anything, I went right to the computer and wrote the speech. I was excited about it. Then I went about the other time. Ordinarily, it takes me forever to get up. I just can do everything in the world, stall around, do floor exercises. They work. And when I'm really into something, I will write for about 3 or 4 hours, and that's it. And it doesn't matter what time or day. And if I'm not, I don't write. Even if I'm writing this play. Now I'm what Kim Stanley used to call a pausa, in a pause. And I'll wait till it hits me.
Right.
There's all this, I think, nonsense about you must sit down and write every day. And I suspect what they do is write their name and think of it in lights. I think you write when you feel like it. That's for me.
Aside from Hallelujah Baby, what shows are you working on now?
Well, I'm writing this new play called The Unexpected Killer.
That's a provocative title.
Yes, I wish I knew what it meant.
So you're writing the play to find out what it meant?
Well, I have an idea. I'll get more closely. And what delights me about all these plays I've been writing lately, they're very different from plays I had written before, and each one is different from the other. Except, as I say, in the political content. But this new one also is not really political.
Right.
It's about, one of the things it's about is theater people and the rest of the world. This woman says, people have jobs. That's the center of their lives, and that limits their lives. But if you have a talent, there's no limit. And I believe that. But I also believe that you can get so absorbed and self-centered in your theatrical life that you have no personal life. And given a choice, I take the personal life. I think that's what we live with. That's the best. I have lived with the same man for 50 years. And that is a security that it's unmatchable. You know, where he's there, we're there. We talk more than we ever used to.
Are you planning to get married to this man?
Absolutely not. I don't believe in marriage except for one thing. Well, two things. I think heterosexual people should get married if they're going to have children, to give the child a legitimate name. And the other thing is benefits.
Right.
So, and I think everybody needs some kind of union to get benefits.
Right.
I don't believe in religion, so I don't care who gets married in what church. It means nothing to me.
But you said in our previous episode that you're spiritually inclined these days. Do you care to talk about that?
Yes, I was skiing. I had bronchitis, and I said, I'm going to stop smoking. And Tom, who was a great skier, he had just gone into AA and given up drinking and smoking. And he said, why don't you use the 12 steps to try? Because I tried everything else. Hypnosis, staple in the ear. You touch the staple, you don't smoke. I touched the staple, it hurt, I smoked. So the first of the 12 steps is you have to admit you have an unmanageable problem. Well, I was a control freak then, and to admit that was enormous. And I did. And the next step was, he said, you turn it over to, I said, oh, here we come, G-O-D. He said, well, you can call, I said, I know, you can call it what you want, a higher power. I'll deal with that later. But I gave up, I did stop smoking, and 2 weeks later I went in to rehearsal for L'Arcage au Fol, which was a big musical I was directing. Everybody was smoking like mad, and I didn't smoke. And this thing about the higher power was in the back of my mind, and I understood it intellectually. And then one day I believed it. I don't know how it happened, but I did. And since then, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because you cannot control your life. It doesn't mean you evade responsibility. But there's certain things, it's up to the higher power. It'll happen or it won't happen. And it relaxes you to believe that. And of course, I believe it's benign.
Right.
Because I have to. You have to believe that the world is or can be a good place. I don't believe it is with this administration. I'm shocked at the ignorance in this country that has reelected him. I mean, I go to Europe now, the first thing I say is, I didn't vote for him, and then they like you.
What would you suggest? I teach playwriting here at Lehman College, and I usually ask my writing guests what they suggest for young playwrights.
Well,
do you have any words of wisdom there?
Even if they disregard it, there's one book I read years ago called Theory and Technique of Playwriting by John Howard Lawson, who was very left-wing, so of course I liked it. But it teaches you structure. And what I find most lacking in the theater today is structure. Because of writing for radio and because of my training, structure comes so naturally to me that I don't have to think about it. And these new plays may seem very as free as Chekhov. Chekhov is highly structured, but they don't realize it. And I think structure is necessary. He talks about what he calls the obligatory scene. Well, if you realize that does exist, it helps you. It helps you. I think read it, even if to say, no, that's not for me. The other thing is to see as much theater as you can, read as many plays as you can, and above all, write as many plays as you can.
For the young directors in our audience, at home and in the theater here, what do you suggest?
Well, when I decided to direct, which was, I thought, well, I can't do worse than the directors I'd been working with. And one of them included Harold Kluman of the group theater, who was, Kazan said he was great for the first 3 days of a play. He could explain the social, the sexual, the economic background. But then, yeah, but what do I do? That he didn't know. I would suggest they go to acting classes.
Right.
Because it's the actor. Directors get reviews or attention today for what I call the schmear. It's all the showing off. They have all kinds of fancy things happen. But the actors aren't talking to each other. They're not inside the character.
Right.
You have to learn how to work with actors. That's the most important thing for a director. I think 50% of direction is casting.
Right. Do you have any sense of where American theater is going today?
I hope not. Because it seems to be headed into the pit of entertainment. I suspect television really changed. I know it changed our lives, but it changed the theater enormously. People don't have an attention span. There's a play on Broadway now that's a big hit, 12 Angry Men.
Right.
I didn't much like it. It's a television play, and that's why it's a hit. It doesn't ask the audience to think. It doesn't ask them to imagine.
It is literally a television.
Yeah, it doesn't illuminate. It's just there, and they can sit and say they get it. I believe you should stimulate them, excite them, and that doesn't happen there.
Arthur, I'm getting a high sign. I'm sorry to say that this episode of Conversations is drawing to a close. It was a great pleasure to connect with you again today. Thank you, Arthur Laurents, and our home and studio audiences for joining us today. And we hope to see you again soon for further conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.